Most rogue guides I've seen, whether it be for leveling or endgame, focus on a melee playstyle, and I know a lot of you are asking for a ranged playstyle that utilizes your bow or crossbow in order to embrace that archer marksman fantasy. Well, today I'm bringing you an incredible marksman build that will help you breeze through those early levels. It has amazing AoE damage, single target DPS, and great damage reduction. Honestly, this is the most fun way to play a rogue. If you find any of what I talk about today useful, then smash that like button as that helps the video out a ton. So the basic skill we're going to pick up is Forceful Arrow, which fires a powerful arrow at an enemy and every third cast makes them vulnerable. Enhanced Forceful Arrow increases the critical strike chance on that third shot as well, and then you want Fundamental Forceful Arrow, which will keep you alive by knocking back enemies if they're close, and even sometimes knocking them down for 1.5 seconds. You don't want to level this beyond rank 1 out of 5, at least early on in the game, as there's far more important skills to unlock and there's very little return gained from that skill point. Our main ability is going to be Penetrating Shot, which fires an arrow that pierces through in a straight line. Enhanced Penetrating Shot increases the damage of the arrow by 10% each time it passes through an enemy, and then Improved Penetrating Shot increases your crit strike chance by a whopping 20% for your next penetrating shot if you hit at least 3 enemies with it. At level 15 you gain access to the rogue specific questline, which I recommend you do as soon as possible, and it unlocks combo points which further enhances your penetrating shot. And at this point your rotation becomes simple. Fire 3 forceful arrows to build up 3 combo points, and then unleash your penetrating shot. Not only does it do massively increased damage because of those combo points, but it now has a 30% chance of hitting a lucky hit. Trust me, it's way better if you use penetrating shot at 3 combo points rather than 2 or 1. I see a lot of players making this mistake early on, and that's unlocking tons of offensive abilities of which you won't be able to use them all on the battlefield because you have limited energy resource. The next ability you want for this build is Dash, which gives you 2 charges that lets you maneuver the battlefield effectively while dealing some damage. I would definitely get Enhanced Dash, as that increases critical strike damage for 5 seconds for any enemies damaged by your dash. Dark Shroud is going to give you even more damage reduction, up to a maximum of 40%. You gain 5 charges of this, and each time you're hit you lose 8% damage reduction. Always before an engagement, make sure Dark Shroud is up for maximum survivability. Enhanced Dark Shroud gives it a 10% chance that on a hit you don't actually lose a ball and lose the damage resist. And then countering Dark Shroud is super nice, because when you have 4 or more active Dark Shroud you gain a whopping 8% critical strike chance. You definitely want to pick up Weapon Mastery fairly quickly as well. With bows we get 12% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, which if you remember, our Forceful Arrow does every 3rd hit, and for crossbows you get 15% increased critical strike damage. This build heavily focuses around doing massive crits, so my preference would be for a crossbow, but a bow isn't too far behind. You want to pick up 3 ranks of exploits. You do increased damage by a massive 18% when enemies are either at the top end of their health bar or at the bottom end. Remember, for any passives, when you're leveling, don't prioritize them early on. It's way more fun to unlock new abilities in my eyes before you start making them 3 out of 3. For this build, when we're dealing with large groups of enemies, we're going to be using Shadow Imbuements, because Shadow causes explosions and is great for taking out groups of enemies. What Shadow Imbuement does is power up your next 2 attacks with Shadow Energy. In this build that will be your Penetrating Shot primarily, but also Dash can be imbued as well. Enhanced Shadow Imbuement gives you even more critical strike chance, a whopping 15% against injured enemies infected by Shadow Imbuement, and then Blended Shadow Imbuement makes enemies affected by the initial explosion vulnerable. Honestly, you can make whole crowds of enemies vulnerable because of this. We also pick up Poison Imbuement for this build, because when you want to deal with bosses or you want large single target DPS, Poison Imbuement is going to be a lot better because it applies a damage over time. Enhanced Poison Imbuement increases the poison damage over time by 1 second longer, and more importantly unlocks Blended Poison Imbuement, whereby critical strikes deal 75% increased poisoning damage. Precision Imbuement here is great and increases your critical strike chance by 9% when 3 out of 3. You will eventually make Poison and Shadow Imbuement 5 out of 5, but again you can leave them 1 out of 5 until later on when leveling. You want to unlock your key passive Precision as soon as it's available. It's going to progressively stack up critical strike damage bonuses, and when you reach maximum stacks it's going to guarantee a critical strike that does 40% increased damage. Again, we're stacking so much critical strike chance and damage just by the build itself, you're going to hit some pretty big numbers. Then finish off the build by getting 1 point in Adrenaline Rush so you can unlock Haste, which 3 stacks of which will give you a bonus to movement speed or attack speed depending on how your energy resource levels are. In terms of aspects, the main aspect you want is the trick shot aspect, which you get a little bit later in the game in the Bastion of Faith dungeon, but you can roll this early on using the Obel's vendor, and if you want to try your luck, I'd recommend going for gloves as they cost the least obels and can roll the aspect. As you can see here, I actually managed to get it as early as level 21. Trick shot is going to create 2 further penetrating arrows perpendicular to your initial shot, which just makes the skill ridiculous as it becomes so much easier to hit multiple enemies, meaning you can activate all the effects of enhanced and improved penetrating shot much easier. An aspect which I'd recommend getting earlier on is aspect of Inner Calm, which you can get in the Wraithwind Wilds dungeon in Skull's Glen, which increases your damage by 5% for each second you stand still, up to a total of 30%. You're often going to be firing arrows from a distance while standing still, so this is a great aspect to get. Put this one on your dagger or sword so you don't need to replace it very often, because your damage is going to be determined by your crossbow or bow for this build, which means you'll be upgrading it often when leveling. So there's our Marksman's rogue build that will take you to endgame and be very effective even there. If you enjoyed what I talked about today, remember to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel for more Diablo builds as we get deeper into the game. I'm Mr. Onnit, and that's it for today. Peace out, guys.